The dining room went dead quiet the moment the chef slammed his palm on the marble counter. "Did you not hear me the first time?" he barked, his voice cutting through the clink of silverware and the soft jazz floating from hidden speakers. "We do not make special requests for people who can't even afford what's on the menu." Every head turned. Phones came up. A few people gasped. Right there under the warm chandelier lights of one of the city's most exclusive open kitchens stood a young black woman, frozen in place, her hands shaking as if the air itself had turned to ice. I wasn't asking for anything free," she said quietly, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "I just wanted to know if the soup could be made without shellfish. I have a severe allergy." The chef laughed, not a nervous laugh, not an awkward one. A cruel, sharp laugh that sliced through the room. "You hear that?" he said loudly, turning to the line cooks behind him, then to the crowd of diners seated inches away. "She walks into my kitchen dressed like that and thinks she gets to make demands." A ripple of whispers swept through the restaurant. "She doesn't look like she belongs here. Is she even a customer? Someone's recording this." The woman's cheeks burned as dozens of eyes pinned her down. Her simple dress, clean but worn, suddenly felt like a spotlight. Her shoes, scuffed from years of walking, felt like proof being entered into a trial she never agreed to attend. "I can pay," she said again, swallowing hard. "I just need—" The chef cut her off with a dramatic scoff. "Sweetheart, this is a chef-driven experience. If you're that fragile, maybe stick to fast food." A few people chuckled, most said nothing. No one stood up. No one said that's enough. The woman's fingers curled into fists at her sides as humiliation crept up her spine, hot and suffocating. She could feel tears threatening to spill, and she hated herself for it, not because she was weak, but because she had promised herself she wouldn't cry today. Not here, not in front of people who already thought so little of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, even though she had done nothing wrong. The chef leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it sting more. "Then stop wasting my time." The words landed like a slap. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with uncomfortable energy. A couple near the window pretended to study their menus. A man at the bar raised his phone higher, zooming in. A woman whispered, "This is awful," but didn't move from her seat. And the young woman stood alone, publicly humiliated, judged without mercy, reduced to a stereotype in seconds. Question of the day: have you ever been judged or humiliated for simply asking for respect or for being who you are? And if you were watching this unfold, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments and let us know where you're watching from today. The chef straightened, already turning away as if she no longer existed. But that's when something shifted. At the far end of the dining room, near the open pass where plates were being wiped and sent out, a tall figure slowly stood up from his seat. He hadn't spoken, hadn't recorded, hadn't reacted at all until now. His eyes were fixed on the young woman. Not with judgment, with recognition, with concern, and something else, something heavy. The chef didn't notice him yet, too busy basking in the quiet approval of his unchecked authority. But a few people did. They noticed the man's tailored jacket, the calm confidence in his posture, the way the restaurant manager suddenly stiffened when he realized who was standing. The man took one step forward, then another, and as he did, the young woman, still fighting tears, felt it. That strange sensation of being seen, truly seen. She looked up just as their eyes met, and for a split second the noise, the stares, the cruelty, all of it faded. Because the stranger knew something no one else in that room did. Something that would bring this entire kitchen to its knees. But before he could speak, before the truth could shatter the arrogance hanging in the air, let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The morning began long before the sun rose. In a narrow apartment tucked between two aging buildings on the city's south side, Aaliyah Carter, 26 years old, was already awake. The walls of her bedroom were thin, painted a tired beige that had peeled and cracked over the years, but she had learned to find beauty even in that. Aaliyah believed beauty wasn't about what you had. It was about how gently you treated what little you were given. She slipped out of bed quietly so she wouldn't wake her mother. The apartment smelled faintly of boiled tea and old wood. Aaliyah moved barefoot across the cold floor, stepping around a loose tile she had memorized long ago. In the small kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove, her movements careful, practiced, almost reverent. Mornings were sacred to her. They were the only moments where the world hadn't yet begun asking things from her. She glanced toward the couch in the living room. Her mother, Ruth Carter, lay asleep beneath a thin blanket, her breathing shallow and uneven. Aaliyah paused there every morning, watching her chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer. "Still here," Aaliyah whispered softly. "Thank you." Ruth had been sick for over a year now. What started as stomach pain became hospital visits, then diagnoses, then bills, so many bills. Aaliyah never said the word cancer out loud unless she had to. Saying it felt like inviting it to stay longer. She brushed her fingers gently over her mother's graying hair, then moved back to the kitchen just as the kettle began to whistle. Aaliyah poured the hot water into two mismatched mugs. One had a faded flower design. The other read "World's Best Mom," the letters chipped from time. She smiled at that one, even on the hardest days. At the small table by the window, she sat and allowed herself one slow breath. This was her world, small, tight, heavy, but filled with love. Aaliyah had grown up in this neighborhood. She knew every cracked sidewalk, every corner store owner, every bus schedule by heart. She learned early how to stretch $5 into a meal, how to smile politely when people looked past her, how to stand tall even when the world tried to make her small. She worked 2 jobs, one at a laundromat during the week, another cleaning offices on weekends. Her hands were rough from detergent and disinfectant, her back always sore, but she never complained. Complaining didn't pay rent. Complaining didn't buy medication. Hope did, and grit, and stubborn, quiet faith. Aaliyah stood by the window as the sky slowly shifted from black to gray. Outside, a bus roared past, splashing through a puddle from last night's rain. Somewhere down the block, a baby cried. Life was waking up whether she was ready or not. She thought about her dream, not the kind she said out loud because those felt dangerous, but the one she carried quietly in her chest. Aaliyah wanted to cook, not just cook, create. Food to her was language. It was how her grandmother used to say, "I love you," without ever using the words. It was how Aaliyah comforted her mother on nights when the pain was too much. She believed food could heal people in ways medicine sometimes couldn't. She used to imagine herself in a bright kitchen, her name stitched onto a clean white apron, serving meals that made people feel seen. But dreams were expensive, and reality had a way of demanding payment up front. So for now, she cooked in her tiny kitchen, using chipped pans and borrowed spices, feeding her mother with the same care a chef might give a critic. Because to Aaliyah, Ruth was more important than any critic could ever be. The couch creaked softly. "Aaliyah," Ruth's voice was weak but warm. Aaliyah turned instantly. "I'm here, Mama." She carried the mug over, helping her mother sit up. Ruth smiled, though the effort clearly cost her. "You didn't sleep again," Ruth said gently, brushing Aaliyah's cheek. Aaliyah shrugged. "I'll sleep later." They both knew that was a lie. Ruth wrapped her hands around the mug. "You don't have to do everything alone." Aaliyah forced a smile. "I know." But she did, because there was no one else. Bills sat stacked neatly on the counter, unopened but heavy with threat. The eviction notice peeked out from beneath them, its red lettering impossible to ignore no matter how hard she tried. Aaliyah had folded it carefully, as if politeness might soften its meaning. She checked her phone. No new messages. No miracles, just the time ticking forward, indifferent to her fear. Aaliyah went back to the bedroom and opened her small dresser. She chose her best dress, not fancy, just the one without stains, the one that made her feel a little stronger. She tied her hair back neatly and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were tired, but they were determined. "I can do this," she whispered to her reflection. She didn't know exactly how yet. She just knew she had to. Before leaving, she kissed her mother's forehead and tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'll be back soon," Aaliyah said. "I promise." Ruth squeezed her hand weakly. "Be careful out there." Aaliyah nodded, picking up her worn purse and stepping out into the morning air. She didn't know that in just a few hours, her dignity would be tested in front of strangers. She didn't know she would be humiliated for a simple request. And she certainly didn't know that the same day threatening to take everything from her was also quietly setting the stage to change her life forever. By mid-morning, the weight Aaliyah carried inside her chest had grown heavier with every step she took. The bus ride downtown felt longer than usual, every stop stretching her nerves thinner. She sat near the window, her purse clutched tightly in her lap, staring at the blur of passing buildings without really seeing them. Her mind kept circling the same terrifying thought over and over again. Today was the deadline. Her phone buzzed and her heart leapt into her throat. She fumbled to unlock the screen, her fingers trembling. Pharmacy reminder, prescription on hold. Payment required by 4:00 p.m. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Her mother's medication wasn't optional. Without it, the pain would come back full force. The nausea, the fainting spells. The night spent curled up on the bathroom floor, whispering apologies for being a burden, apologies that broke Aaliyah's heart every single time. The cost sat burned into her memory, $740. She had $112 in her account. She had already asked everyone she knew. Her aunt had cried with her on the phone, ashamed she couldn't help. Her old high school friend had stopped replying after the second message. The charity clinic had a waiting list months long. The emergency fund at the church had run dry. There was nowhere left to turn. As the bus hissed to a stop, Aaliyah stepped off and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Downtown rose around her like a different world, glass buildings reflecting the sun, luxury cars gliding silently through intersections, people in tailored suits walking with purpose. This world wasn't built for people like her. She passed a digital billboard advertising a new restaurant opening, Serafina, a chef-driven culinary experience. The words gleamed in gold against black. Aaliyah stopped, her breath caught. She had seen that name before. Weeks ago, while cleaning an office late at night, she'd overheard two executives talking. They mentioned a private tasting, a billionaire investor, and something about the kitchen being funded by a silent partner with deep pockets and a reputation for backing talent. Back then, it had just been noise. Now it felt like a thread. Serafina wasn't just a restaurant, it was opportunity, a place where influential people gathered, where chefs, investors, and decision-makers passed through daily. Aaliyah swallowed hard. She didn't want charity. She wanted a chance. She thought about the recipe notebook tucked at the bottom of her purse, pages filled with her grandmother's dishes, rewritten in her own careful handwriting. She thought about the soup she'd made last night, coaxing her mother to eat 3 spoonfuls by promising she'd add more ginger next time. Aaliyah knew food. She understood flavors the way some people understood numbers. And somewhere deep inside her, a dangerous, fragile idea took shape. What if she could talk to someone there? Not beg, just explain. Maybe ask for work, a trial shift, anything. Something that could turn into money fast. Her chest tightened with fear. Places like that didn't welcome women who looked like her. They didn't welcome people without resumes, without recommendations, without the right clothes. And they definitely didn't welcome requests. Still, the clock kept ticking. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her landlord. Rent overdue, last notice. Aaliyah leaned against the wall of a closed storefront, her knees suddenly weak. The city noise blurred into a dull roar as tears filled her eyes. I'm trying, she whispered to no one. I'm really trying. She wiped her face quickly. Crying wouldn't help. Crying never changed anything. The billboard glowed above her again, almost mocking. Serafina. She looked down at her hands, calloused, capable, aching. Hands that had cooked through grief, through exhaustion, through nights when she wanted to give up but didn't. If there was even a small chance, she took a shaky breath and straightened her shoulders. Walking into that restaurant meant risking humiliation, being judged, being dismissed, being told she didn't belong. But walking away meant something worse. It meant watching her mother suffer because she was too afraid to try. Aaliyah stepped back onto the sidewalk, her heart pounding, and turned toward the address glowing on the screen. Every instinct screamed at her to stop. But desperation has a way of silencing fear. By the time she reached the end of the block, her decision was made. She would go, even if it cost her her pride, even if it broke her. Because when the people you love are running out of time, you stop caring about what the world thinks of you. And with that painful resolve burning in her chest, Aaliyah set off toward the one place she never imagined she'd enter, hoping, praying that it wouldn't be too late. The closer Aaliyah got to the restaurant, the heavier her steps became. Serafina stood on a wide corner where old brick met polished glass, its tall windows revealing warm lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and people who looked like they belonged in magazines. A uniformed valet opened a door for a couple stepping out of a sleek black car, smiling as if the world had never told them no. Aaliyah slowed down across the street. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, simple dress, modest jacket, shoes worn thin at the soles, clean, neat, but undeniably out of place. She smoothed her hair back again as if doing so might somehow prepare her for what waited inside. You're allowed to be here, she told herself, but her heart didn't believe it. Each step forward felt like pushing against an invisible wall. She remembered all the times she'd walked into places and felt the air change, security watching her a little too closely, clerks answering with impatience, smiles that faded the moment she spoke. Still, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Hope, small, flickering, but alive. She crossed the street when the light changed, the sound of her shoes swallowed by the hum of traffic. As she approached the entrance, laughter drifted out through the open doors, followed by the rich aroma of garlic, herbs, and something slow simmered and comforting. Her stomach tightened. This is what you love, she reminded herself. This is what you understand. Inside, she could see the open kitchen, stainless steel gleaming, flames dancing beneath pans, chefs moving with sharp precision. The head chef stood at the center, commanding the space like a general on a battlefield. Aaliyah paused at the door. Her fingers curled around the strap of her purse. The recipe notebook pressed against her side, a quiet reminder of who she was beyond her fear. She thought of her mother on the couch, wincing through pain but still smiling when Aaliyah brought her soup. She thought of the pharmacy clock counting down. She thought of how humiliation, painful as it was, couldn't hurt more than regret. A host glanced her way, hesitation flickering across his face. Aaliyah caught it and almost turned around. Almost. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the scent of food steady her. For a moment she imagined herself years from now, standing confidently in a kitchen like this, her voice calm, her hands sure. "Just ask," she whispered to herself. "Just ask." When she opened her eyes, her fear hadn't vanished, but her resolve had hardened. Aaliyah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth wrapped around her instantly, along with the sudden awareness of being seen. Conversations dipped for a fraction of a second. Eyes flicked toward her, then away. She walked toward the counter, her heart racing, rehearsing her words again and again. "Excuse me, I have an allergy. I just wanted to ask." Her voice didn't feel ready. But time was no longer something she could afford. She reached the edge of the open kitchen, waiting for a pause, for a moment of permission that never came. And when she finally spoke, softly but clearly, she had no idea that this single, reasonable request, made with humility and fear, would ignite a confrontation that would expose cruelty, silence a room, and set the stage for a reckoning no one saw coming. The moment Aaliyah spoke, the rhythm of the kitchen faltered just slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle but firm enough to carry over the hiss of sauté pans. "I have a severe shellfish allergy." I was wondering if the head chef didn't even let her finish. He turned sharply, eyes raking over her from head to toe, not with curiosity but with irritation, as if she were a stain on his pristine counter. "Who let you walk up here?" he snapped. Aaliyah flinched but held her ground. "I'm sorry, This is an open kitchen, not an open mic," he said loudly, wiping his hands on a towel. "You don't interrupt service." "I understand," she replied quickly. "I only wanted to know if the soup could be prepared without," he laughed, again loud, performative. "Without shellfish," he repeated, turning to the diners seated inches away. "You hear this?" A few uncomfortable chuckles floated back. Aaliyah's face burned. "I can order something else if it's not possible. I just need to know what's safe." The chef leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to drip with contempt. "If you're that sensitive, maybe this isn't the place for you," she swallowed. "I'm willing to pay. I just don't want to end up in the hospital." That did it. The chef straightened, eyes flashing. "Listen," he said, voice rising so the entire room could hear. "This is a chef-driven experience. We don't cater to every special request that walks in off the street." Off the street, the words hung in the air. Aaliyah felt them land on her chest like a weight. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said quietly. "Just basic safety." The chef scoffed. "Basic safety?" He gestured at her clothes. "You think people come here to deal with this kind of drama?" The room went still. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses hovered near lips. Aaliyah noticed a woman at a nearby table glance away, embarrassed. A man at the bar raised his phone, recording openly now. Someone whispered, "This is getting bad." Still, no one intervened. "I belong here as much as anyone else," Aaliyah said, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. The chef's smile was thin and cruel. "Belong," he echoed. "Sweetheart, do you even know where you are?" Her throat tightened. "I saw the menu online," she said. "I saved for this." The chef laughed harder this time, slapping the counter. "Saved?" He shook his head. "You don't save for Serafina. You're invited or you're not." Aaliyah's eyes stung. She could feel the room closing in, every glance, every whisper amplifying her shame. "I just wanted to eat safely," she said, barely above a whisper now. "And I want people who respect my kitchen," the chef shot back. "Not people who think they can stroll in here and make demands." Her hands trembled. Aaliyah looked around, searching for a face, any face that might show understanding. She met the eyes of a couple seated nearby. The woman looked sympathetic but quickly turned back to her plate. The man stared at his phone, silence, thick, crushing. "I'm sorry," Aaliyah said again, hating how small she sounded. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The chef smirked, victorious. "Then do us all a favor and leave." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. A server pretended to polish glasses a little too intently. No one said a word. Aaliyah's chest tightened so hard she thought she might actually collapse. She had walked in here with fear, yes, but also with dignity. Now that dignity felt stripped away, thread by thread, in front of strangers who had decided her humiliation was none of their business. She nodded slowly, as if accepting a verdict. "I'll go," she said. As she turned, the chef added one last blow, his voice dripping with disdain. "And next time, read the room before you open your mouth." The words followed her like a slap. Aaliyah took one step back, then another, her vision blurred, tears finally spilling over. She wiped them quickly, ashamed, desperate not to give him the satisfaction. That's when the chair at the far end of the dining room scraped softly against the floor. At first, no one noticed. But then a man stood, tall, calm, impeccably dressed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush forward. He simply stepped out of the crowd and toward Aaliyah. And for the first time since she'd walked into Serafina, the balance in the room began to shift. Aaliyah stopped mid-step. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, as if something inside her had finally given out. The room felt too bright, too loud, too exposed. Her ears rang, and for a moment she couldn't tell if the pounding she felt was coming from the kitchen or her own chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, out of habit now, not guilt. The chef had already turned his back on her, dismissing her existence with a flick of his towel. The conversation around the room slowly resumed, silverware clinking again, laughter returning in uneasy bursts as if nothing meaningful had just happened. That hurt more than his words. The way life simply moved on. Aaliyah stood there, tears sliding freely now, her shoulders shaking despite her effort to stay composed. She pressed her lips together, biting down on the sob rising in her throat. Crying loudly would make it worse. Crying quietly already felt like defeat. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said softly, though she wasn't sure who she was saying it to anymore. No one answered. A server brushed past her without meeting her eyes. A woman at the counter shifted her purse closer to her chair. A man leaned toward his date and whispered something that made them both glance at Aaliyah and then look away. Invisible. That's what she felt, worse than invisible, unwelcome. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clutch the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her mind spiraled, replaying the morning again and again. Her mother's tired smile, the pharmacy message. The eviction notice folded neatly like it might behave if treated gently. What was I thinking, she thought. Why did I believe I could belong here? The shame burned hotter than the tears. "I'll go," she said again, louder this time, hoping that if she announced it clearly, the pain would somehow lessen. The chef didn't even look at her. "Good," he muttered. "We're busy." That single word, good, landed harder than everything else combined. Aaliyah's knees weakened. She turned toward the exit, each step feeling like she was wading through water. The doors suddenly seemed impossibly far away, as if the room had stretched just to prolong her humiliation. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara she couldn't afford to replace. Her breath came in shallow gasps now, panic tightening her chest. I failed, she thought. I failed her. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, not disappointed, just tired. That made it worse. "I'm sorry, Mama," Aaliyah whispered under her breath. "I tried." She reached the edge of the dining room, almost free, almost gone. That's when she heard it, not a shout, not an insult, but the quiet, unmistakable sound of someone choosing to speak when everyone else had chosen silence. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, steady, clear. Aaliyah froze, so did the room. She turned slowly, her vision still blurred with tears, her heart pounding with confusion and fear. Part of her braced for another attack, for someone else to tell her she didn't belong, that she should have known better. But what she saw instead made her breath hitch. A tall man had stepped fully into the open space between the kitchen and the dining area. His presence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. He stood straight, hands relaxed at his sides, his expression composed yet unmistakably firm. The chef looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "We're in the middle of service," he snapped. "If you have a problem—" "I do," the man replied calmly. The words cut through the noise like a blade. Aaliyah's heart thudded. The man turned to her, his gaze softening. Not pitying, not curious, respectful. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. No one had asked her that, not once. Aaliyah tried to answer, but her voice caught. She nodded instead, tears spilling again despite her effort to stop them. The man's jaw tightened, not in anger but restraint. Then he turned back to the chef. "I heard everything," he said evenly. "And what just happened here is unacceptable." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The chef scoffed, crossing his arms. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think I do," the man replied. "She made a reasonable request. You humiliated her." The chef laughed, dismissive. "And who are you supposed to be?" Aaliyah's heart raced. She didn't know who this stranger was. All she knew was that for the first time that day, maybe for the first time in a very long time, someone had stepped between her and the cruelty. The room held its breath, because the chef had just asked a question, and the answer was about to change everything. The man didn't answer right away. He studied the chef with an expression that was calm but heavy, as if weighing something far more serious than an insult in a restaurant. The noise of the kitchen softened around them, cooks slowing their movements, servers pausing mid-step, everyone sensing that this moment mattered. "I'm someone who believes in decency," the man said finally. "Something you seem to have forgotten." The chef rolled his eyes. "Listen, buddy, if you've got a problem with how I run my kitchen, you're welcome to leave with her." Aaliyah flinched at the word with, as if she were a problem to be escorted out. The man noticed. He stepped slightly closer to her, not invading her space, but positioning himself beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, with her. "You don't get to speak to people like that," he said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "Not here, not anywhere." A few diners shifted uncomfortably. The recording phones wavered. A server near the bar looked toward the manager, who stood frozen, pale. The chef laughed again, louder now. "You're really making a scene over this?" She interrupted. "Service. I handled it." "You humiliated her," the man corrected. "There's a difference." Aaliyah stared at the floor, overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part, small, fragile, but growing, felt something else entirely. Relief. The man turned to her again. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then answered softly. "Aaliyah." He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. "Aaliyah, you didn't do anything wrong." Her breath hitched. Those words landed gently, but they shook her to her core. "I just wanted to eat safely," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and you deserved that." The chef scoffed, clapping sarcastically. "Wow, a heartwarming speech. Are we done?" The man's eyes hardened slightly. "No," he said, "we're not." The chef leaned forward. "You don't own this place. You don't work here, so unless you're planning to order something, you're wasting my time." The man smiled faintly, not amused, but patient. "Actually," he said, "I'm very interested in this place." That got a reaction. The manager took an involuntary step forward. The chef's confidence flickered for half a second, barely noticeable, but there. "And I'm very interested," the man continued, "in how the people inside it are treated." Aaliyah glanced up at him, confusion mixing with hope. The chef snorted. "What are you, some kind of food critic?" "No," the man replied. "A blogger, influencer?" the chef pressed, mocking. The man met his gaze evenly. "No." The silence stretched. The chef threw his towel onto the counter. "Then sit down and mind your business." That was when the man finally shifted his weight, straightening fully. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My business," he said calmly, "is ensuring that the values behind this kitchen match the money that built it." The room went very still. A server gasped softly. The manager's face drained of color. Aaliyah's heart pounded as realization began to dawn, not fully formed, but close enough to make her dizzy. The chef frowned. "What money?" The man looked around the room once more, then back at the chef. "The money," he said, "that keeps these lights on." A hush fell over Serafina, and in that silence the chef laughed, sharp, dismissive, unaware that his world was already starting to crack. "Yeah," he said, "and you are." The man took one slow breath and answered. The man didn't rush the moment. He let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, until every whisper died and every phone froze mid-recording. Even the kitchen flames seemed to quiet, as if the room itself was listening. Then he spoke. "My name is Jonathan Hale," he said evenly, "and I'm the primary financial partner behind Serafina." The words didn't just land, they detonated. For a split second, no one moved, no one breathed. The air went thin, sharp, electric. The chef blinked once, then again. "That's not funny," he scoffed, but the edge in his voice was gone now. "You think you can just say?" Jonathan calmly reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He didn't wave it around, didn't shove it forward. He simply turned the screen so the chef could see. A signed contract, a familiar logo, a name printed in bold at the bottom. Jonathan Hale, equity partner, 60%. The chef's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. That's not," his voice cracked. "This has to be some kind of—" The manager rushed forward, panic etched into every line of his face. "Chef," he whispered urgently, "it's him." A ripple of stunned murmurs swept through the dining room. "Oh my God, that's Hale Industries. He funded the entire kitchen." Aaliyah's knees nearly buckled. She stared at Jonathan, her mind struggling to catch up. The man who had just defended her, the one who had spoken to her with kindness and respect, was the same man whose money had built this place from the ground up. The chef stumbled back a step, grabbing the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I didn't know," he said quickly. "If I had known—" Jonathan's eyes hardened. "That," he said sharply, "is the problem." The room went dead silent. "You didn't know," Jonathan continued, "so you showed exactly who you are when you thought no one with power was watching." The chef shook his head, desperation flooding his face. "She interrupted service. I was under pressure. It was a misunderstanding." Jonathan turned to Aaliyah. Was it a misunderstanding? He asked gently. Aaliyah's throat tightened. Her voice came out soft but clear. No, she said. It was. That single sentence felt like a verdict. Jonathan nodded once, then turned back to the chef. You humiliated her for asking about an allergy, he said. You judged her worth based on how she looked, and you did it publicly. The chef opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Jonathan raised his voice, not shouting, but loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. Let me be very clear, he said. Serafina was built to celebrate talent, hospitality, and humanity. What I saw today was arrogance, cruelty, and prejudice. Every phone in the room was recording now. This kitchen, Jonathan continued, will never be a place where dignity is optional. He turned to the manager. Effective immediately, Jonathan said, he is removed from his position. The chef's head snapped up. You can't do that. I can, Jonathan replied calmly, and I just did. The chef's bravado collapsed completely. You're firing me over her? He blurted, pointing at Aaliyah before he could stop himself. The room inhaled sharply. Jonathan's expression turned icy. No, he said. I'm firing you because of you. The chef's shoulders slumped as security stepped forward, gentle but firm. As he was led away, the crowd parted, their expressions no longer neutral, now filled with shame, shock, and realization. Aaliyah stood trembling, tears streaming freely now, not from humiliation but release. Jonathan turned back to her. I am so sorry, he said quietly, for what you endured and for how long it took someone to speak up. She shook her head, overwhelmed. You didn't have to? Yes, he said firmly. I did. The restaurant remained silent, bearing witness, because in one shocking moment power had shifted, truth had surfaced, and justice, real, undeniable justice, had finally arrived. The chef was escorted through the dining room in stunned silence. No applause followed him, no whispered defense, just the soft scrape of chairs as people leaned back, giving him space, as if his cruelty were contagious now that it had been named. The doors closed behind him with a muted thud. And just like that, the man who had ruled the kitchen moments ago was gone. A breath seemed to release from the room all at once. Jonathan turned back to Aaliyah. The tension in his shoulders softened, his voice lowering again as if the rest of the world had faded away. Aaliyah, he said gently, are you all right? She nodded, then shook her head, overwhelmed by the question itself. I don't know, she admitted. Her hands were still trembling. This has never, she broke off, pressing her lips together as tears fell freely now, unchecked. Not the sharp tears of humiliation, but the deep, aching ones that come when something heavy finally lifts. Jonathan gestured toward an empty chair. Please, he said, sit. A server hurried forward, eyes wide, suddenly all attention and care. Water, she asked softly. Aaliyah nodded. Her legs felt weak as she sat, clutching the glass with both hands like an anchor. Jonathan remained standing, turning to the room. I owe all of you an apology, he said calmly, not for stepping in but for allowing an environment where something like this could happen. A few heads bowed. I will be reviewing every hiring decision, every policy, every standard in this establishment, he continued. And I expect every one of you, management included, to understand this clearly. His gaze swept the room. Hospitality without humanity is meaningless. The manager swallowed hard. Mr. Hale will do whatever is necessary. I know, Jonathan replied, because you don't have a choice. He turned back to Aaliyah. Would you mind telling me, he asked gently, why you came here today? Her fingers tightened around the glass. For a moment she hesitated, old habits urging her to protect her pain, to keep it private, but something about the way he looked at her, patient, sincere, made her feel safe. My mother is sick, she said quietly. She needs medication we can't afford, I thought. Maybe I could find work or talk to someone. I just wanted to eat safely, but I also, she shook her head. I was desperate. The word hung between them. Jonathan's expression shifted, not to pity, but resolve. What's your mother's name? He asked. Ruth, Aaliyah replied. Ruth Carter. Jonathan nodded. Ruth is going to get the care she needs. Aaliyah looked up sharply. What? I have a medical foundation, he said simply. I'll take care of the medication, the treatments, the specialists, everything. Her breath caught. I can't ask you to. You didn't, Jonathan said firmly. I'm offering. She shook her head, disbelief flooding her face. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, he replied, by surviving today. He paused, then added, and by speaking the truth when it mattered. Aaliyah covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling again. Around them the room was silent, no longer passive, but attentive, humbled. Jonathan wasn't finished. There's more, he said. She looked up, wary now, afraid hope might hurt more than despair. I overheard you talking about food, he continued. And I've been watching this kitchen for months. Talent matters to me, passion matters more. He reached toward her purse. May I? Confused, she nodded. He gently pulled out the worn recipe notebook, careful as if handling something sacred. You wrote these? He asked. Yes, she whispered. Some are my grandmother's. Jonathan flipped through a few pages, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting. He closed the notebook slowly. Aaliyah, he said, I don't give charity, I give opportunity. Her heart pounded. I want to sponsor your culinary education, he continued. School, training, housing if needed, and when you're ready, if you want, I want you back here, not as a guest, as a chef. A gasp rippled through the room. Aaliyah stared at him, frozen. I don't even know what to say. Jonathan smiled softly. Say yes when you're ready. She let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry, covering her face as the weight of the day finally broke apart. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. And everyone watching knew they had just witnessed something rare, not just justice, but grace. 3 years later, the morning light poured through wide kitchen windows instead of cracked blinds. Aaliyah Carter stood at a stainless steel counter, her posture relaxed, her movements confident, her hands steady in a way they had never been before. A clean white apron was tied neatly around her waist, her name embroidered on the front in deep blue thread. Chef A. Carter. She paused for a moment, smiling to herself as the scent of fresh herbs and simmering broth filled the air. Outside the kitchen, the soft hum of conversation floated in, students, volunteers, and community members waiting for lunch. This wasn't Serafina, this was the Ruth Kitchen, a nonprofit culinary space Aaliyah had opened just 6 months earlier, named after the woman who sat comfortably by the window now, laughing with another guest as sunlight warmed her face. Ruth Carter looked healthier than she had in years, stronger, brighter, alive. The medication had worked, the treatments had worked, and so had hope. Mama, Aaliyah called gently, wiping her hands on her apron. The soup's almost ready. Ruth smiled, eyes shining. Take your time, baby. You always do your best work when you're calm. Aaliyah laughed softly. So much had changed since that day at Serafina. Jonathan Hale had kept every promise. He funded Aaliyah's culinary education, stood quietly in the back row at her graduation, and never once took credit for her success. He had helped her secure housing, ensured her mother's care, and then stepped back, letting Aaliyah build her own future. She had returned to Serafina once, not as a guest, not as a novelty, but as a visiting chef invited to collaborate on a seasonal menu. The staff had listened when she spoke. The kitchen had gone silent when she walked in, not with judgment but respect. And when she left that night, she knew something important. She didn't need to prove she belonged anywhere. She already did. Now she spent her days teaching young people from neighborhoods like hers, kids who loved food but had never been told that passion could become a profession. She hired people who needed second chances. She cooked meals for families who couldn't afford them, not out of pity, out of understanding. Aaliyah placed bowls of soup on the counter, garnishing each one with care. The same recipe she had once asked about, now perfected, safe, nourishing, and made with love. As the room filled with warmth and conversation, she glanced around, her heart full. She had been humiliated once for asking a simple question, but that question had revealed the truth about cruelty. The power of speaking up, and the life-changing force of compassion. Moral: never judge someone by how they look or where they come from. You never know the strength they carry or the future they're fighting for. One act of kindness, one moment of courage can change a life forever. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, inspirational stories like this. Because the world doesn't change through silence. It changes when we choose to see one another.